speaker or program and then a conversation. But this is just an open mic because kind of wrapping up a very strange year and seeing what our fellow monetary reform interested people are thinking about what we're going through and what we might go through or would like to go through. We're hoping to find the common money reform thread through our different interesting topics. And I'm glad that Stephen came with a topic that we might start with, which is something being sponsored coming up by Our Money. We might have a little conversation about that. Go ahead.
No, I'm not sure which Our Money.
Well, right, he put a link. We should probably look at the link he put in the chat to see, because there are a couple of Our Monies. And maybe, I'm guessing everybody here would like to be a little better informed about this. So that's a place to start. And it might be Reverend.
It is, yeah, it is.
Reverend Coates.
Reverend
Coates.
Coates Our Money. That's, yes.
Sean Sebastian, Tamara Knopper, Paul Raul Carrillo, and Alex Goodwin.
Oh, yes. Those are some known characters, aren't they?
Being facetious, or
well, we know those names. We've seen them before, some of us. And I think it's a valid conversation in my view for this evening. I'm not sure who would like to start.
You called on me. I'll start, and I'm thinking of my fellow Stephen over here, who brought it up, and it's I think you should check it out and see what you think. The basic difference between Our Money and ourselves. Well, first I can go back and say the person who's led that movement is Reverend Coates, and he belonged to very much this group, but then he became enamored with modern monetary theory, and in that theory, they don't really suggest changing anything. They say government can go into debt endlessly, and that's okay. You just really need to get the money out there. And our position is a little different. We believe that government can be the first ones to can get the money out there, but rather than having the banks creating it, and the government doing it through bonds, bonds and various types of financial securities, that's not the best way to do it, because they're ending up paying interest to bankers and investors, and the Constitution gives them the right to create money and tells them to create money. Congress shall coin the money, and coin in that day meant to create the money. It was the printing press. So, and then the question to ask, Steve, is who's getting the first chance to spend new money when it comes into circulation? And it's basically for almost all money except for coins, it's the banks, and that's an immoral privilege that they've gained from us, and we need to take it back, or more and more money is going to just get concentrated into their sector, and by the rich in that sector. Yeah,
that's a lot in one dose, and I appreciate how clearly you said it, and I wonder if people here have questions, if you've kind of gotten anybody's curiosity going. Are there any questions someone would like to put out into our conversation right now about MMT or what Stephen said, or should we move on to a different topic?
Oh, well, One thing I wanted to say,
Mark is on the stack, and who else?
oh, okay.
Steve's on the stack. Let Steve go
Sure.
first, maybe, because he's newer.
Steve Norris and Carly. Okay.
Yeah, I just wanted to say I was poking around on the Our Money website, and it had a quote here. Impose the burden of checking inflation on the financial sector by limiting money creation through private lending to public interest uses. So I thought that might be like less MMT, more like, I don't know, what do you call like the sovereign money reform or something, like more of the AFJ style, more just money.
Steve, their position may have changed somewhat since it's Reverend Coates, because Reverend Coates is very aware of us too. And so
I liked your first advice that if it appeals to him, he should certainly attend and get some information to report back.
Okay.
That would be very cool. Carly was on the stack and Mark Pash.
Yeah, so I looked at the description of the event, and it sounds like it's bridging the let me just see. It's talking about what is it? Racial justice work and money. So relating those two and bringing in like COVID and how that's impacted people. So yeah, I'll definitely check it out and see what they're about. I do have a question off of what Steven said though, because I'm newer and MMT is something that is, well, is it modern monetary theory?
yes,
So like,
Mhm.
I guess in speaking about money terms, it's helpful as someone new to like have the acronyms explained because we have a lot of them that are thrown around and it's really hard to like keep track of all that. But anywho, so MMT obviously has different values than Just Money or the Alliance for Just Money. So like what I guess, what are the big differences? And is it possible to talk to MMTers and try to like bridge the gap between the two movements? Because
Very cool.
there seems to be a lot of like
overlap.
MMT, AFJM, or other money movements out there are very shut off to MMT. So I guess like, why is that so noticeable? And then is there a way to like bridge the gap? So I don't know, a weighted question.
I
But
appreciate your question a lot. I'm not sure what Mark Pash is going to say, but if he doesn't answer it, we'll get somebody to answer it next. Go
I
ahead,
have
Mark,
some
it's your
thoughts,
turn.
too.
Pardon me, Steve?
I have some
Yeah,
thoughts too for answering, but let's
We'll
go.
let somebody else take a
Mark
crack
is
at it.
next.
We'll let somebody
Let me-
else take a crack at it. Go ahead, Mark.
Let me answer the difference in actual operation. It's no different than what we're doing now. It's just, I mean, we have well over 20 trillion of debt, so they're doing that almost unlimited basis. But what MMT does, and I'll tell you the reason why I think because many of the MMT members started with the AMI, I know many of them, and they just switched to MMT within recent times. I think it's mostly a political marketing way of doing it. But the difference is, from an economic standpoint, forget the fairness stuff, is that you have, with MMT, you have two monetary systems in place instead of one. And this is what you have the objections from the Democratic, the centrists. And when you have two monetary systems pouring money out there, your risk of excess inflation and asset bubbles are extremely high. And you can destroy a currency. And so that's one of the main economic negatives. I think that I think they did it because I think they did it from a political marketing standpoint where they could actually get the attention of Congress and start talking about it. I'm not sure it was the right ploy, rather than changing the whole system. So the NEAT Act eliminates the Federal Reserve, which is the most powerful non-military institution in the history of the world, central banking system, which is in every country. And so instead of taking them on, they would just have a dual system. So I think it was more political than it was from an economic standpoint. And that's my answer in those particular situations.
Thank you. I see people on the stack. Paul, Virginia, and France are all on the stack. I'm hoping that your remarks will still be a little bit directed toward these questions for new people regarding the difference between AFJM and modern monetary theory, since it came up. We didn't bring it up. It just came up. Go ahead, Paul, Virginia, and then.
Okay. I've been doing
France.
battle with MMT spokespeople for a long time. And Mark is right. They basically want to keep the same system that we have now. And they feel it's easier to sell if they just keep things the same and basically say, well, with the system we have now, we can do what we want. We can do everything that monetary reformers are asking for. There's no need to change. And if you listen to their narrative, it's filled with, I hate to say it, and Joe, if Joe were here, he would be much more direct than I, but it's basically lies. It's disingenuous reinterpretation of what we have now. They claim that the government does not need to tax to spend now. They say taxes is essentially it's a sham. The government spends first, takes taxes out of the economy to cool the economy down, and destroys that tax money. And for some reason, they think that's a palatable message to sell to the public. And the funny thing is, it's working. People will repeat their memes almost like a mantra. They'll use words like the government can always, and the government can never. And they always leave out the fact that before it can always do these things, it needs to have legislation to enact to achieve what they say the government can already do. It's very frustrating. And there's some academic snobbery going on there. There's a group from University of Missouri, Kansas City, that kind of were the initiators of it. And as any academic, especially in the field of economics, when you have something that's yours, you'll defend it to the death. And if anybody has ever read any of the MMT literature, and this, you'll hear the same complaint from economists and other very much more knowledgeable people than I. It's very, very intractable. You can't understand it. And in fact, that's how I got involved personally with monetary reform. Is I for 2 years struggled. I had email conversations with Stephanie Kelton, with Joe Firestone. These are all main people in the and I just could not understand. And I'm a physicist. I mean, I'm not, the sharpest nail in the drawer, but it didn't make any sense, and it still doesn't. And I'm still, we're still challenging MMT people to document and prove some of the things they're saying. And I don't know what to say. We have a critique on our website, and a lot of other monetary reform economists have critiques, and it's worth reading, their stories. And it's just very, very frustrating because they are the rock stars. They have the limelight now, especially from the left, because their goals are the same as ours in terms of wanting to pay for things. They claim we can already do it. no problem. We can just do it. And essentially, to put it in a nutshell, they want to roll over the debt forever. They feel the debt is it's innocuous, it's benign, it doesn't really matter. And it's just a very unsatisfactory way of, it's not the way, if you want to start out and create your own money system from the beginning, it's not something you would do. And so that's my little rant on MMT at this point. So,
Thank you very much.
Uh-huh.
We do have a pretty robust stack right now. Virginia, then Franz, then Mark Young.
I wanted to offer a caution about thinking our values are different. My sense from reading several MMT books, the one I read most recently was A Case for a Job Guarantee. I disagree with her, but I love her values. And my sense is that's where we can connect. We can say we all want social justice. We all want a better world. My sense of the difference between MMT and what we're doing, they're very clear about it up front. One of the websites, isn't it titled New Perspectives, New Economic Perspectives? They're very clear that they have come up with a new way of looking at our existing system. And if you look at it their way, then it justifies going ahead and spending on all the things that we need to spend for. I mean, we do fundamentally disagree with that. We think that we need to go all the way. But what I'm finding kind of intriguing over the last year is what I'm seeing is it's true of both the public banking, and I see it as happening also in the MMT movement. They are shifting subtly toward our position. We're hearing MMT increasingly, someone just found it on their website, talking about only creating money for public good. Okay, that's a big step from where they were 5 years ago. I mean, they were recommending that we spend new money on the public good, but they were still allowing plenty of room for money to be created by the private banking sector and spent for anything that they chose. So we're seeing a little bit of a shift there. And I'm hoping if we can connect on those goals for a better society and for social justice, and just keep up the pressure that, okay, this is great, you want to spend for this, and in order to let those changes you're spending for have fertile soil to dig in their roots and be permanent, we must change the money system. We must go that extra step and then explain what that extra step is, which is all public money.
Thank you, Virginia. That's so. Do I hear everyone agreeing that one big difference is they will defend the Federal Reserve System to the death so far, while we have it right on the front burner about buying out the Federal Reserve System and making it public? I want to say thanks to Hobart for putting a link on the chat. Lots of critiques about MMT. So for people who are curious for more depth on this question, he put a link in the chat where to start on our website, finding out about it. And Bruce asks, maybe someone knows this specifically, where specifically is there the statement from them that they would defend the Federal Reserve? And
so I'm putting a link on that for that right
good.
now.
Thank you very much. Okay, now the next person on the stack is Franz. Then Mark Young.
I think in order to understand the MMT, I think one of the most revealing books to me was the one by Stephanie Kelton herself. And that's called the deficit myth. And she starts out with the major statement that people can understand that people ought not to start thinking about debt in terms of households, but in terms of sovereign nations who have monetary sovereignty, and therefore they can create whatever resources, financial and otherwise, are needed for the welfare of their particular societies. And so, and for her, and I agree with her, the major kind of danger to avoid is inflation. And so as long as you create money and you spend it on infrastructure and all kinds of other things, then there need not to be inflation. So that's my first point. My second point is that one has to make a distinction between the financial, fiscal, and monetary subsystems of the global economy. And all of them are interconnected, but they are not the same. And so there is quite a lot of confusion if one doesn't make that kind of distinction. And so one of the things that I'm doing in the sequel to my book is outlining 26 imperatives.
Sorry,
And
very deep. Sorry, what? Outlining.
excuse me?
You said outlining what? I'm sorry.
Yeah, 26 imperatives or things that has to be done in those three sectors, subsystems of the
26.
economy.
Uh-huh.
And then 12 of the 24 are basically reformist measures, which can be are not too difficult to do. And the real challenges are the transformational policies that are to be pursued in those three sectors. And so, to give an example, for the Federal Reserve, the Federal Reserve can start already adding on a third mandate of decarbonization or optimal solarization in order to deal with the climate situation. And that would be added on to the present dual mandate of price stability and also maximum employment. So that is a reformist measure that can be pursued. But the real challenge is to have the whole international monetary system be based upon decarbonization. And so one of the things that I'm heavily involved in now is to see how this can be brought to the UN climate conference in November next year in Glasgow. And so we can talk about that further, how the alliance and also the international movement, the MMR, can be involved in that. So these are three things that I would like to bring into the discussion. So the first one was the go back to the real sources. I read also the Kansas people's statements, and some of them are really difficult to understand and are complicated. On the other hand, Kelton and others, it's far clearer what they are proposing, and it's really in conflict with the establishment. It's also really transformational. And there are, of course, different versions. People are interpreting this in different ways and are applying it in different ways. And so if you compare, for instance, the UK alliance called Positive Money, or the Dutch organization, which is called Ons Geld, or Our Money, they emphasize different things, but to a great extent, they come out at the same kind of endpoint where the system, the three systems, have to be reformed, and these reforms would lead to transformational global change in the global systems, because we cannot simply start talking only about the US or the UK or Canada or Holland. We really have to start thinking about how these three systems can contribute to a just and sustainable global governance system. That is basically our final goal.
Thank you.
So all of these things are being written up in the sequel to the 2012 book, and presently I call the sequel the Tierra Monetary Pathway, and it is part of a blueprint for this just and sustainable global governance system. Sorry for the long intervention, but I really wanted to be clear.
Frans, thank you very much. Thank you. We have Mark on the stack, Mark Young, followed by Don.
Thank you. I'll try to be brief. I think my take on modern monetary theory is probably closer in line to Virginia's in that they do have goals that are similar to ours, as far as what she talked about, the job guarantees, the environmental funding of environmental remediation and changes, and also they talk about a little bit about just how we can pay for things. I think the main difference for me is that MMT, because what they're doing is a lot easier. For instance, it's a lot easier to get from where we are now to just increasing the debt and using that increased debt to pay for things we're doing. Whereas where we're going is a full step further in changing the monetary system here in the US, and by default, changing the international regime. And I think the reason that some of us, at least for me anyway, while we support the greater change, is because MMT would leave the current economic hegemony in place. And so it's very good for someone who, like the US or other Western nations that have very big balance sheets and large economies, to say, I want to borrow some more. But it's very difficult for a poor nation to say, I want to borrow some more. So if you think of Greece or poor countries in Africa or poor countries in South America, poor Asian countries, they don't have the ability to borrow money. There's nobody that's going to buy their bonds. And so it doesn't necessarily work. And so if I say that, hey, there is $1 trillion worth of new bonding capacity out here, and do you want to purchase bonds from the US or do you want to purchase bonds from the Congo? Guess what people are going to pick? Even if those bonds in Africa, the central banking functions are almost non-existent. They really get their funds from international banks, the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund, and things like that. So that's my biggest issue, is that it doesn't really provide the sovereignty, I think, for people to really improve their own nations and help their own people. It really does keep the current Western powers intact. And so I think it's a lot easier for them to say, let's just do this and let's just borrow more money. The other thing I want to point out is that we talk a lot about paying the interest, but it's also paying principal. So I can sit up and say, okay, let's do $500 billion, but I'm not just paying the interest on that. I'm also paying back the principal, just like any other amortized debt, you pay part principal and you pay part interest. That's another one. The other thing I wanted to say is that the reason I don't like MMT is because when they say create money for, or create loans for the public interest, is that much of the money needed for public interest is not something that can be monetized, right? Anything that we do in the free market can be monetized. So if I'm making a widget and people want that widget, I can borrow money and I can include the principal and interest cost in my profit and make sure things work. If you're talking about building a road or building a homeless shelter, you can't monetize that. That's just money you have to find a way to pay back. And the only way you can really pay that back is through increased taxation to pay on that debt. And so what we're talking about really is how do you fund government activities, which by and large, probably 95% of government activities are not, you can't monetize them because they're not for-profit activities. Unless you want a toll road on every local street and things like that, they're not monetizable. And so they are things that we generally pay for with our tax dollars because they're not monetizable, because they don't charge for them. And so we're looking for ways to pay for those things that cannot be monetized, which then helps everybody, and that you don't have to worry about paying back principal. You don't have to worry about paying back interest and things to that sort. So that's kind of my take on it. I don't have an issue with what they're trying to do. I just really have an issue with how they're doing it and how they're falling short. And it's a very Western philosophy, and it doesn't take into account some of the international things that Franz was talking about. So that's my comment.
Mark, thank you very much. I'll tell you what, that last comment about not being able to monetize real public services like education and highways, I had not heard that stated so succinctly before. I haven't heard it made as much of an argument, and I'm really grateful to you for bringing it up that way. Don is on the stack, and then Stephen Walsh. And pretty soon we are going to ask the people who are very quiet to say something. So don't fall asleep.
I did see Paul before me actually in there, but
Oh, Paul is before you?
yeah, I saw him in there.
Thank you.
No, I'd like the new people to go for it. I do have a lot to say, but I'm really curious to what others have to say. They can come back to me.
Okay, thanks for bringing it up, Don.
Great. Well, this sounds interesting. I haven't really learned about the MMT until now, but it's reminding me of what you're seeing. You're seeing a lot of talk by even the Federal Reserve saying, we don't have a mandate to give funds directly to the people, but they're kind of inferring that maybe they need that mandate, like more of the old guard system funding, giving funds to individuals and helping, with welfare. But it sounds like to me, from what I've been hearing from the MMT, and there's a lot of talk about that, like using the same system to be more just, more social, which is all good and well. And that's kind of one of the things I wanted to bring up and talk about that I had emailed Mark about. But yeah, just back to the MMT, it sounds like maybe they would be a middle way, but you'd also have to show what the drawbacks of that middle or kind of lukewarm path, what the dangers are of it. And maybe it's where the debt still exists. Maybe what Mark mentioned, not enough focus on non-profitable sectors and infrastructure, but then also maybe the debt still exists and then it has to be dealt with in some way. And I'm new to all this, but I understand a lot of the boom and bust of the entire economy is all driven by the need to deal with that debt somehow. So that said, it sounds like a middle way, but maybe you guys could piggyback on that by kind of talking about how the intention is great, but if you want to go all the way, this is what you got to do. And then the other thing I wanted to bring up was this concept that's been floating around. You probably heard of the Great Reset. The Schwab guy from the World Economic Forum has been talking about that, and they're using the COVID narrative, like this is a great opportunity for us to rebuild capitalism, and make it more just, more social. But again, it's the same old dudes, that want to run the show. So that's what I was thinking for you guys, if you could piggyback on that concept of the Great Reset, which there's people on the right that are seeing it more as this conspiracy, but there's plenty of people on the left that they're hearing the chatter about it and they're saying it sounds great, but also, they want to do this from afar, unaccountable to any sovereign democracy. And it's the same old players. So that's what I wanted to drop in here, is the Great Reset, and how it's similar, where it's like using the same old system to create a kinder, gentler capitalism. So I was wondering if you guys could chime in on that, and maybe it would be a good thing to use as a talking point to kind of like either deconstruct the Great Reset or say, hey, you want a real Great Reset? Why don't we do it, within our sovereign nation and with real public money and yada, yada. So anyway.
Oh, thank you for those comments.
Yeah.
I'm watching the chat here. I hope other people are watching the chat too. There are some cool asides here and kind of supporting information from people. I appreciate that, what you brought in the reset stuff. I was not aware that it's appealing to the left, but that's interesting you say it. I don't know if other people have heard much about it at all. And I'm hoping that Stephen Walsh's remarks will relate to all this new stuff that's come in since he got on the stack. Oops, mute, unmute.
Yeah, I'll say a little bit on the Great Reset. But I want to go back to imagine everyone. Imagine you are Abraham Lincoln. Okay. The Civil War is starting. It's 1860, 61. We're getting into the Civil War, and you've got to make a choice. You can give up on the war, or you can figure out a way to get money to help pay for this war. So how are you going to pay for it? Well, you need to get money, and you want to raise. You want to raise money. So you go to the maybe you can sell bonds, or you can go to the banks. And they started selling bonds, but they needed more money. And so they went to the banks hoping to get, a lot of loan money. And the New York bankers wanted, believe it or not, from what I've read, 25 to 35% interest, because they considered the war pretty risky. And there wasn't, and then what type of collateral were you going to put up? And that's what the South did. They put up their cotton as collateral, and England took the cotton as collateral. Lincoln said, I can't afford 25, 35% interest loans. What am I going to do? That's unacceptable. And so he had a volunteer officer, actually from Chicago, who had lunch with him and said, you know what, you can go ahead. Congress shall coin the money. Congress doesn't need those banks. Congress can create the money, and you can go ahead and win your Civil War with it. So what happened is, this exactly happened, and by first in March of 1862, 150 million greenbacks were created. And the law also said the earlier greenbacks, that's money too. And that earlier money was to be paid back in silver or gold, but people got used to it and they were happy to use that paper money rather than silver or gold. And in an 1862's legislation, it said, this is the money. It's not the gold or the silver, it's these greenbacks that are the money. And that money was not created by going to the bankers and borrowing money. And you can ask an MMT, or please explain the Civil War. How does the government got away with creating money without paying interest on it? Why do we have to pay interest today? You know, you could ask them that question. So think about yourself as being Abraham Lincoln. How you're going to pay for a war? And if you end up paying if you end up paying any interest on as in Article 1, Section 8, Congress shall create the money or coin the money. So let's assume then if you want to look at bankers today allowing that situation where you can, MMT says go more and more into debt with bonds and, don't worry about the bankers. My senator from Illinois has said about Washington, D.C., it is the bankers, not us politicians, that run this place. So then, talk about the dangers that exist. And then lastly, I had a little conversation with Joseph Huber about MMT, and I suggested to him, if MMT thinks they're so great, why don't they get a great national modeler? There's people at the IMF and World Bank that know how to really model a banking system. Get Michael Kumoff from the Bank of England to model MMT and see what he does with it. Because, for him, I believe it would be a joke almost. Okay. Now I'm going to say something positive. MMT is descriptive economics. It explains the situation as it is. And the central part of their theory for me does not come from Randall Ray. You'll get mesmerized and lost reading him. To understand MMT, you have to read Michael Hudson. And Michael Hudson will explain all of debt, on the other side of debt is credit, debit. And when you look at credit debit in the private sector, the business sector, the public governmental sector, you can then begin to think about economies as they're run today. And Goldman Sachs uses the same model and gets very perceptive thinking on it, deep thinking on it, and that's workable. But it does not solve the problem about how to get out of this debt trap and the bankers controlling the system. So that's a little bit of information there. Let's go to the World Economic Forum for a second. I want, rather than deal with it, I want you, Steve mentioned that there were some bankers involved with it. And there are, if you were at the AMI conference and you heard Michael Clark speak, or if you know what's going on in India today, it's the World Economic Forum that's going to destroy the agricultural livelihood of not a few million, but hundreds of millions of people in India today. So that's the world. But back in 1988, they wanted to start a nature bank. Oh, let's help, let's reset. And we're going to reset. We're going to create a bank out of the Sahara Desert, Antarctica, Greenland, the Ozarks, all of the natural areas, and we'll create, and that'll be our collateral. And with that, we can create assets, and that'll be wealth, and we can create a bank out of that wealth. And that was a nature bank. And then the questions came, and they asked them in Congress, actually, this is in 1988, they asked them in Congress, and they said, if there's a default, who's gonna own Greenland, or who's gonna own the Ozarks or Antarctica? A bank could end up owning them. And when you understand banking, but anyhow, they they were going to get their wool pulled all over their eyes, and they still are, but they didn't accept it. That was going a little too far at that point. But anyhow, I'm going to stop at that point.
Thank you. I think now we've almost finished our first hour, and I would welcome someone who wants to wrap up this conversation, and we might move on to something a little lighter for the second hour. But it would be fun to know what Marie or Leslie are thinking, or Bruce or Chris, John. If any of you who haven't said much would like to add something right now, a new topic or a wrap up of this one,
Yes,
you
I'd
would
like
be
to.
welcome right now. Oh, and Mark Young will be on the stack in a minute. Bruce, go ahead, Bruce.
Well, maybe not for this hour, but I would like to have a brief discussion of public banking, which is what I've been involved in for the last 2.5 years. And I had a great talk with Govert, and also some conversation with Lucille about it. But and that, I think that would be a would not require the same kind of time. I found this to be really helpful. This hour, I was completely overwhelmed 2 years ago at this Harvard conference, which was full of MMT, and I'd never heard of it before. And so this has been a real burst of light. Thank you.
Oh, I'm really glad to hear that. Paul is on the stack. Oh, Mark was on the stack first, then Paul.
I actually was not going to wrap up. I was going to comment on John's reflection on the Great Reset, and what it means to me, and how I agree that it's a good framework and a very good narrative for what we're trying to do. When he emailed me, I don't know, it was late last week, I think last week sometime, and he mentioned the Great Reset, and I mentioned him that I had often spoke of monetary reform as like the grand bargain, and that bargain is between it's nation to nation. It's the free market capitalistic system to nation, and also it's agreement between nations and its citizens. And I see it as it's very international in the sense that it's nation to nation, and right now nations, political governments compete against each other. And in my mind, competition should be left to the free market and to businesses to compete. Whereas I think monetary reform gives us the possibility to stop competing. So there's not necessarily a competition between China and the United States, or Russia and the United States, and everywhere else you look, regional competition and everything else. We can actually set a floor for citizens to make sure that everybody has a modern standard of living, that nations are not competing, for instance, China manipulating money or making sure their wages are low so that they can get more market share. We can kind of eliminate all that and put it onto the free market side. And that's one of the reasons why I see it as this kind of great reset. There can also be a new understanding between free markets and sovereign nations, because you have the ability to say, okay, well, maybe we won't tax you as much, but we're going to do these things. And so when right now everything exists under the free market capitalism bubble, in a sense, right? So sovereign nations get their money from either from taxes from businesses or from the people from taxation. Whereas monetary reforms give sovereign nations the ability to stand on their own next to the free market instead of up under the free market, right? And that's why you get all the fights and the lobbying and everything else. Whereas if if nations, and by nations inherently goes to their citizens, if we want something, we can pay for itself. If we say something's a public need and we want it done, we can do it. If we want every home in the United States to have solar panels and things like that, you can make that happen with public money because there is no debt and money is created as an asset and as credit. And so it gives you the opportunity to actually rethink our entire monetary system. I often tell people in some of my writings, I say, well, just think about the game of Monopoly, right? It has rules. Monetary reform really gives us the ability to rewrite the rule book, and we can set up the game how we want it to be played. And with doing that, we have the ability to make it a very, very just system that can support people, that can support capitalism, and that, you know, we can really move forward into the future with a very different paradigm. I love Mark Pash's book, and for those who haven't read it, he has a foreword. Then his first thing is he says the year is, I can't remember exactly what year it is. He can tell you. The year is 2053, and monetary reform has been enacted. And so I love that part about it because it really gives you a vision of what we can look forward to in the future if we can get rid of these things and actually institute monetary reform. So I just want to say I love the thing of the Great Reset, and I think it's a great narrative for monetary reform also.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I coincide a lot with that idea that we've almost lost our imaginations about the world we want. Many, many people are just grinding along and trying to survive, and thinking about monetary reform allows us to, as Mark quoted Mark Pash, you know, open up your imagination. What kind of a world might humans actually be capable of? And that to me is just very exciting. Paul was going to have something to say, and now we've got a request to talk about public banking. We can just do that unless someone else wants to suggest another topic. I don't want to put anybody on the spot, but I'd really like to hear from some of the people who've been quiet. Go ahead, Paul.
Yeah, I'd like to lead into public banking a little bit too, but I can throw out 100 gripes about MMT and people are not going to be able to absorb them. But I like to put out some points that I think it's very important that people do read about MMT, but things for people to look out for. MMT claims monetary reform is irrelevant. And this, because they have the limelight, it's a major diversion of what we're trying to do. It actually hurts us. And that's why we're so angry. So it might not be obvious, why are we so, it's just another way to change the system, but it's actually hurting us. And people are reading, and Franz, you're reading a little bit more into Stephanie Kelton and MMT than I believe is warranted. You don't judge them by their aspirations. They want the same thing we do, but they're proposing a pathway that goes nowhere. When one asks MMT, how? When you ask Stephanie Kelton, how are you going to do this? You'll get no answer. And I read her book on the insistence of someone else who was an MMT promoter, and I found one little sentence in the entire book that said, oh, well, yeah, we're going to have legislation to accomplish what I say we can always do now. And to me, it was so buried. I tried to find that sentence again, and it took me a long time. MMT has always had our goals. So don't be blinded by their aspirations. I want to point out that the Fed can't do anything. The Fed can do one thing, and that is try to pressure banks to adjust interest rates. And that's it. This mandate about full employment is garbage. That's not what the Fed can do. All they can do is try and make it easier for banks to create more money or less money, and that's it. One thing to watch out for with MMT, and when you do your reading, is they insist that government creates money right now. And they insist that the Treasury does it in cahoots with the Federal Reserve, and the Fed just buys Treasury bonds and funds the government. This is illegal. Now, the rules have been stretched in emergency situations like now. but eventually all the chickens are going to come home to roost, and we're going to have to repay those loans that the Fed has been basically buying up. Just a little comment on the Great Reset. As far as I'm concerned, capitalism has shown itself to be a massive failure right now in terms of the quality of life of people in society. The minimum wage has gone down over the last 20 years, and they can't even cope with COVID now. So when they say, "Oh, it's a reset," what they're saying is, "Whoops, things are falling apart." Let's say, "Well, we understand that, and we're just going to reset it." So it's a little bit disingenuous to call it a reset. Public banks, again, banks can't do anything. If they lend money, they need to get that money paid back with interest. So it's been one of my concerns about public banking is that where does the profit come? As Mark was saying, there's no profit in public purpose programs. The profit is the benefits that we get as a society. There's no money made to repay the banks. So when we move into public banking next, I'd be curious to hear what people's thoughts are on that, and how banking is, again, a solution to our problems as opposed to money creation, which does not involve the requirement that money be repaid. So that's my sum up.
Thank you. John Hall's going to offer some comments about central bank digital currency. Woo.
Well, it's a different topic, but there was an interesting article in the recent Economist, which was talking about central bank digital currency. And it was worrying that the shift to central bank digital currency, which means, of course, the idea that people would be able to have their accounts in the central bank as opposed to having it in commercial banks, that this might deprive banks of the deposits that they need for liquidity to maintain their lending. And then what the author says, well, maybe that wouldn't be so bad because that would shift banks from lending on the basis of deposits to lending on the basis of equity, which is, of course, the kind of lending that non-banks do. They lend on the basis of equity, not on the basis of deposits like banks do. So it was interesting in the article that basically what they were saying is, well, yeah, this might be a problem for banks, and maybe it would be a very good problem because it would basically shift banking into narrow banking, as they term it in there, which means that it's virtually equivalent to 100% reserve banking. I thought it was very interesting that occurred in The Economist.
Has anybody else given thought here to the idea of central bank digital currency? Go ahead, Mark, if you wanted to say anything, but mostly that's a topic for people who are a little deeper into this, I think.
Yeah, I'll just make one sentence. The digital currency doesn't have a formula to distribute the money to the public. So
right.
it defeats the purpose that monetary reform is trying to do, is get the money where it ain't. So, but at least it's a step in the discussion.
Very superficially, let me ask some of you who do know about it, I know there are several European countries who are thinking about having their central banks allow direct accounts with individuals digitally, and that's what they refer to as the CBDC, central bank digital currency. But I've heard, and I wonder if you'd comment on this, is that just a way for the central banking system to try to shore itself up and survive the turmoil, the tumult that they have caused, and that, you know, that we are questioning?
Can I respond to that, Mary?
Please do.
Yes, I think I think the motivation for central bankers to go to central bank digital currency is that central bankers realize that they have lost control of the money system. They never really did control the money system anyway, since commercial banks have always created the money. So they've never really controlled the money supply. But now what they all realize is they no longer have control, because one of the things they used to be able to do is to stimulate the economy by reducing the interest rates. Well, if the interest rates are at bottom, they have no more way to stimulate it. The only thing they can do is to approximate that through the quantitative easing, of course, which does put some more money in the system. Unfortunately, it puts the money in the hands of those who are wealthy enough to have securities to sell to the central bank. So it really doesn't put the money where it's needed. What I see the central bank, I think Mark is right that there is no explicit directions that we've seen from people who advocate central banking about how to slip this into essentially money creation by government. But I think what I read between the lines, at least, is the idea that if banks themselves are constrained in terms of their ability to do the money creation kind of lending, then and if that reduces toward zero, there will be a new need for money creation, and there will be only one other source, and that is the central bank. And if you consider the central bank essentially an arm of government, which isn't the case really in the United States, but it's closer to that in other countries where there's better linkage between the policies of the central bank and the policies of the government, then it would mean in effect that the central bank would be creating creating the money for the government to use in a way to essentially spend into the economy, to spend for things that are non-monetizable, education, pandemic, all the rest. So I see that is kind of an avenue which, and you're right, Mark, that they haven't specified that. But if you read this, what I read between the lines in this economics article is that's the way it's sort of seen.
Can I say something about Europe versus the US? From what I understand, Europe does not have an FDIC yet that we have. And they're very much concerned with the safety of their money in their accounts. They don't have the safety that we have. So you won't hear CBDC, central bank digital currency, really discussed here in the States. In Europe, safety is very much a major concern. And so they want a safe place. They want to know that there's not a bank that's going to go bankrupt and they're going to lose all their money. Even if it's at the central bank, it's safe. And that's one of the drivers of that. But Stephen's right. I mean, who's going to create the money? What authority is going to say, Germany, we're going to give you this amount of euros, and Greece, you're going to get this amount of euros. It's very different than here. So I'm curious to see how Europe is going to handle some authority who's going to be doling out money. I just don't see that happening.
All right. Thank you. Hobart, I see put a link in here for people who are interested in following up a little bit about this topic, central bank digital currency. Oh, it might be the very article that John was talking about. And I have Stephen on the stack and Mark Young on the stack right now. And we do want to try to get to Bruce's question about public banking, maybe in a few minutes. Go ahead, Stephen.
Yeah, I'm sorry I haven't gotten out the videos in some official cut up form. Alfonso, who did the technology, is working on that from the AMI conference. But at the conference was Edgar Wortman from the Netherlands. And if you listen to his talk, you can use central bank digital currency in a number of different ways. And the ideas that they started in Holland was, if you have central bank digital currency, the politicians were worried about it because you could have, like in 1984, money is not anonymous. Whatever your transaction would be with a central bank digital currency in the central bank of a country, you're sort of, the feeling is you're being monitored. And so the Dutch really wanted cash. So they went back and forth between cash and to what extent they should have digital currency. And they came down that going cashless and going towards a digital currency would still be okay. And they passed it to where individual people could have their own accounts in the central bank. Now, this was put to the legislation. They acted on it. They gave it to a scientific committee who studied it for 3 years. And they said, indeed, this would be a good way for banks not to overdo it. You know, you can't really trust or be, you have to be worried about banks, and you got to be able to put the brakes on them, and that people could have their deposits instead of being in the bank, but being in the central bank where it would be extremely safe. There's advantages there. Then to answer the question is, well, there's 2 ways. There's you can play around with central bank digital currency. So if one way you can play it around is the central bank sort of creates it in the system as we have, and saying that our money's very safe, and they basically aren't changing it. And that's what was happening in Frankfurt. And they were pushing back the Onsgeld, the money reformers in the Netherlands. And that's where the breakdown is today. The other thing I just want to mention too, a bit about the central bank. It was in November 2017 that Michael Kumhoff, who's a central banker and he's a modeler, he presented a model in Frankfurt at that time where the central banks have a digital currency and they can give 2% interest. So people would want this money and want to use this money. They gave them a 2% interest rate for just taking in the central bank digital currency. And this would be what was called, and it still is called, side-by-side competition. You have competition with the central bank having these like safe accounts, and that's money that's not in the regular banking system, because individuals now can put money in a central bank according to this form of thinking. So, and it gets to Paul's idea of having very safe accounts, and that was the basic idea of Edgar Wortman's talk. So, yeah, central bank digital currency, but it gets played around with and used by different people to, you know, the people, if you can talk about currencies, but it tends to advantage some unless you're very careful, and Onsgeld in Netherlands are pushing. And just one point, because some of us are really against the central bank digital currency, but in Edgar Wortman's view, he was using it in his talk for the Netherlands, is the banks, it would go all towards central bank digital currency, with the banks no longer being able to create money, and there was a 10-year transition for doing this. So it'd be no more bank created money in the side-by-side competition, which would be dangerous. It becomes a central bank, or that is government money being created, which, you know, which then becomes sort of like the Need Act, or what we're proposing too. So it depends who's talking when they're talking about central bank digital currency and what's happening. I hope that wasn't too confusing, but good
That was
luck.
helpful.
Well, let's see, the takeaway for me was it means different things to different people. And in a way, it's just a distraction or confusion. Maybe there was something more there that I missed.
Well, we can bring it up. Maybe some people will want to comment or have their thoughts on it too.
Right, Mark is on the stack now.
Yeah, just a couple of things, real quick points. First, on the central bank digital currency, central bank digital currency was actually in legislation earlier this year when the COVID first came out. It was not passed, but one key component of it is that it still had to be treated as debt. And so it wasn't really going to have any type of positive effect. The other thing about central bank digital currency, and I think the reason some people like it, is that it does give people the ability to cut out banks because you're going with the central bank. And so you would not have to have your money in a regular financial institution or bank. You would have a direct account at the central bank where your money is stored. So that's just two things. And to lean into that, to the public banking side, I don't really have an issue with public banking, but I think from the Alliance's standpoint, when you talk about public banking and you're not talking about creating money as an asset, that's, I think, where we draw the line. Could there be a need for a public bank to fund things that are that you can peripherally monetize? Yes. But for things that cannot be monetized, a public bank is still loaning money into that whatever it is that they're looking at. And so public banking still can't solve the problems that we're looking at when you need to fund something that has no monetary value. So regardless if the interest rate is 0.5%, if you can't monetize what you're doing to even pay back the principal, you still can't do it. And so those are just a couple of points I want to make on those issues.
Okay, thank you. We got into the topic of the public banking now, and that's a pretty good introduction in my view. I wonder if Bruce wants to make any more specific question, or I really wonder what
Virginia is on the stack also.
Marie or Leslie, who's on the stack?
Virginia.
Virginia.
I'm sorry, I didn't see you, Virginia. Go ahead.
I just wanted to comment when you said the central bank digital currency really wasn't significant. I wanted to say, I think what we all need to be apprehensive about are the huge marketplaces. In China right now, there are a couple of enormous companies like Amazon on steroids times 10 that are they're creating a marketplace in which they have total control. People translate their, and they have, it has its own money. People will take their Chinese money and convert it to the marketplace money, or they get paid in marketplace money. They buy, they sell, and all of us are aware of what Amazon and their control is doing to our communities. Amazon and Facebook have both been working for a couple of years. They saw that going on in China, and they've said, oh, that would be really nice, wouldn't it, if people spent Amazon dollars? They have a name, I've forgotten. Someone will remember what that is.
Libra for Facebook.
Not the Libra?
The Libra, yeah, thank you.
Facebook dollars.
Yeah, basically they're Facebook dollars. And they are also after the power and privilege of creating new money in their dollars, making loans to people within their network. So
that's different from central bank digital currency, right? Virginia, you're on a different topic, or is this the same as CBDC?
Well, in a way, it's a kind of CBDC, but the central bank is Amazon. and well, really, and what I think that some of all of the governmental central banks' responses and all the attention to central bank digital currency is they're looking at what Amazon can do and saying, we better, this train is leaving the station if we don't get on it.
You got free shipping on your money though, so.
Wow.
So it is a very important topic to be paying attention to if I was going to do this earlier, a little comic relief, since Stephen asked us to be, pretend we're Abraham Lincoln. And I don't know if you can see, because I have a black shirt, but here's my beard. We're here tonight so that government of, by, and for the people shall not perish from this earth.
Thank you. Very good. Stephen Norris, thank you for putting up that link. Do you want to say anything about it? And then someone else, Hobart's been putting up really cool links all evening. I'm grateful to him. Stephen, do you want to say anything about the link you put up?
I mean, I just saw it now. Apparently they have another name for it, DM. So.
Oh, but that's the Facebook money?
Right. Well, it's not just Facebook, but yeah, Facebook and consortium or whatever.
Yeah, okay. All right, does anyone want to continue the little conversation we started about public banking? Someone commented that public
I had a
banking,
Question.
Mark commented that public banking cannot meet the needs for infrastructure and public, like education and things, any better than bank lent money because it still has to pay interest. What do people think of that concept?
Yeah, Bruce is on the stack, I think.
Yes.
Oh, I didn't see it. I'm sorry.
So
Bruce.
is Friends also.
I'm sorry, who else?
Friends.
Fran. Oh, okay. Bruce, then France.
Going back to public money, public banking. My sense is that the key issue for the alliance is the replacement, if you will, essentially of the privatized finance and banking by sovereign money, by public money. That's my understanding of what's at stake. And I have two, if that's true, I have two questions. One is that has to do with I don't see that the Public Banking Alliance is, they may not, for example, in North Dakota, they point to the fact that local private banks exist side by side with the Bank of North Dakota. So they're not totally opposed to to privatized banking, but they're certainly opposed to the entire large scale monopoly by privatized banking on money creation. So in that sense, they seem to me to be have a common denominator, a common ground with the alliance. I don't know whether that's true or not, but that was my sense. Whereas, and I'd assumed that MNT was also, because of its emphasis on central banking creating money, didn't realize that they were allowing the privatized finance and banking system to exist. So that was one of the insights I got tonight. But the other question I have about putting all of our faith in the government creating money. Now, on the one hand, I'm absolutely for that. But the other issue I have with this has to do with what I see to be the overriding political issue, and that is control by big power, regardless of whether it's privatized monopolies in every sector of our economy, having taken over the government. And the other is that big government is a bugaboo, but it's also a danger. It's a real danger. And so those are two questions I have that go beyond. In other words, I think that if there could be agreement, for example, some of you pointed out that maybe MMT is shifting towards at least a recognition of well, that's beside the point. But I'd like somebody to comment on what those two issues, if they're clear.
Someone want to recap, or shall I try to? That concern about making public money the way the NEAT Act does, the way AFJM
Yes.
promotes, that does give a lot of power to a government that we have in recent decades learned to mistrust because it seems to be so corrupt. Yeah,
Can I
that's
speak
the way I understood your question. Go ahead, John.
Yeah,
Franz was on the stack.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Let's give Franz a chance, then John, please.
Yeah, I think the issue of public banking is a important issue, but I happen to see it as a transitional way to a monetary system where banking, either public banking or privately owned banking, become utilities.
Yes.
And in order to do this, the kind of transition, I would see public banking as a transitional form. And I fully support it now because it's a proper way for people to allocate money and get interest payments back to the public. And so it's a very good thing. But once we start talking about a transformed money system, then also the public banking will also not create money, because they also, as public banks, are also involved in creating money like privately owned banks. So one has to see it in the larger perspective. And in the largest perspective, I've been proposing and thinking, and also to some extent proposing, that the US puts the IMF and the World Bank on a negotiation table with China, because China is almost as strong internationally in terms of the road and belt system and the financing than the IMF and the World Bank. And so we get enormous competition there. So where do we want the future to go? And I think a monetary system that is based upon a standard, not a gold standard or a silver standard, but on a decarbonization standard, is a system that would also demand a global central bank. And the global central bank would be the one that creates the money. And the bankings, public or private, are the ones that are going to carry this out within the program of the United Nations, of their Sustainable Development Goals and Agenda 2030. And in that way, you get a global governance system, and that is sustainable and just, but particularly sustainable in and is able to deal with the looming climate catastrophes. And so so that is one of the things I hope, that is what I hope, that people can start discussing this, and particularly also at the climate conference in Glasgow. And I feel that is where we have to be and make our voices heard, because there people are talking about financing for development, financing the cost of climate measures, etc. And so we really have to start thinking in a global kind of framework.
Exactly.
And so what I've been calling, what I earlier said about those 24 imperatives, in terms of reform and in terms of transformation. I call it the Global 24 Initiative. And so we could, as an organization, alliance, and particularly the international movement of monetary reform, they can come up with something like this of the Global 24 Initiative. Then people will say, yeah, what kind of initiative? Okay, 24, why not 26 or 21? And so you get people really to start thinking into a larger framework of where the future is to go. Because we ought not to forget that the situation with China and the US is only getting more dangerous. And I bought 2 days ago another new book, which is called The New Map, and by Daniel Jurgen. And it's very interesting. He really illuminates what's happening in the world, but he doesn't come up with any kind of future because he doesn't have a proper framework in which he can consider what the next step is going to be. So my wish for 2021, be it at the UN climate conference or anywhere else, is that this map, the new map by Jurgen, is combined with the Tierra monetary roadmap that I've been writing about, and which I now in greater detail are specifying how to go from point A to B, going from reformist measures to transformational policies. And so my main concern is that when we talk about these major economic issues, and particularly these financial and also fiscal, we haven't hardly talked about fiscal and monetary sectors, then we really have to really develop a large kind of framework. And I'm very happy with this new book by Jurgen, because he really lays out very clearly how energy, and particularly also still fossil energy and climate, is leading to a clash of nations. And his conclusion is our future is a disrupted future. Now, I think he may say this, and he makes good points in showing why it is disrupted. But I think the next step is, and where we come in, this monetary reform and transformation, is that we say we have a kind of ability to look into the future within a particular framework. And so I think it's really important for the alliance and also for the international groups that are affiliated with the international movement of monetary reform to be able to speak at those places. You know, who is speaking? The big reset of the World Economic Forum. And of course, these are all kinds of little changes on the periphery. They want to maintain the status quo of a market fundamentalist neoliberalism. And so, and that is, we have to talk about this, not only among ourselves, but also in places where it really matters. And that is basically on the international level, where those decisions are made by nation states, and also by the 2000 communities, non-governmental organizations that are credited by the UN, for instance, at the climate conference. So 2000 of people's organizations are also making their input. And I strongly feel that we have a message that is really
Yes.
important.
Yes. Yes, thank you. And I really appreciate your idea of taking monetary reform to the international climate forums. Maybe people in this group are going to want to follow up on that. Maybe there's a way we can follow up on it together. But we have a robust list on the stack right now. And we were talking about the public banking. There were going to be some responses to that. Franz, I think I have to try to steer it back the other way right now.
Yeah, so, but that is basically what I'm talking about, is the global central bank.
Yes,
That is what.
thank you. Yes.
No. We got Virginia, Paul, John, and Carly on the stack.
I think Virginia spoke. Yes, thank you, Mark. Paul, John, and Carly.
I did want to answer Bruce's question.
Yes, go ahead.
That's a new stack. I wanted to say about public banking that initially they were relatively clear about the fact they were not talking about having public banks have the power to create new money. And over the last 10 years, they have moved toward at least acknowledging that that might be a good idea too. And the addition I'd like to make to Mark's comment about the public can't do anything that is monetized. A public bank can be part of a circulation system so that currently, I mean, there've been several examples. California had a bond issue that was a $9 trillion that was going to be spent on education. And the interest on that was going to be another 9 trillion. And taxpayers were going to pay that $18 trillion over the next 20 years. So one thing a public bank does do, which is wonderful, is it can function as a development bank, or it can create public money and not charge any interest on it. And the taxpayers are the ones who are going to pay that back, but they're going to pay back half of what they would have paid back if we'd gone to another bank. And then so I see public banking as a good, I totally support them, go for it. And I think that when we have full money reform, local public banks can serve to be distributors and be development banks so that some decisions are made at that local level within the bank. And then the second thing, the question about big government and top-down decision-making, I want once again to recommend James Searle Waiki's book, The Wisdom of Crowds. And it actually, both the things I've written, when we're talking about money reform, we're talking about two aspects of it. One is deciding how much new money needs to be created in a year. And that's kind of a technical, how do we decide question. And then the second part of it is lending, spending, giving, loaning, putting that money out into the economy. And according to our Constitution, that second piece belongs to Congress to make a decision about how new money gets into the economy. Congress can decide to give some of it to individuals, they can give some of it to states, local, and I think it's important to have some national infrastructure projects. But the other piece, how do we decide how much new money to create? I am in love with the idea that we use that aggregated wisdom of everyone in the country. I really think if you put on tax forms and on ballots, just a little bar, here's right on, we're keeping the money absolutely steady, the value. Or, you know, over here, things are just costing me way more than they did a year ago. You know, you check your little mark, and if we aggregate all that, the science says we will actually get the best answer to how much new money to create if we do that. The critical piece is that you have informed people who, and most people are informed about prices. We all have to go shopping. You need a diverse group, so you need different kinds of people. We really don't want to hand that decision to a team of economists from, you know, JP Morgan Chase and someone else, Goldman Sachs. That would be what we'd be likely to get. We want that decision made by as independent, diverse, informed people. And the best way is to ask absolutely everybody. And I think when you do that, you also remove some, you could do the same thing actually for what everybody's priorities are. Why not give everybody a tax form that says, you know, how do you want your money to be spent this coming year? So that Congress is getting some real live feedback. And I think it's only when we implement these techniques of group decision-making and issue-based decision-making are we going to really succeed as a full community, as a nation. So it's not top-down, it's collaborative, it's partnership, remember? Yes, this is a partnership model of how we govern ourselves. And that's the big reset we need to make.
Isn't that awful how it sounds like science fiction in the world we actually live in? I love it, Virginia. I definitely love it. Carly, will you go next, please? Then John Howell, then Paul.
Yeah, so my question to the group would be, so I'm going to use an analogy that Mary has brought up, but so money is like the bottleneck to all social issues, to all of our problems, right? It's the bottleneck. So my question is like, how do we like open up the bottle so that money is not the problem? It's what's making us thrive. I know it's a really vague question, but if anybody would like to answer that or make comment.
You know what? I just got a real quick answer. I guess I could put it in the chat. James Gibbs Stewart, a wonderful guy who came to our monetary conferences well into it. I think he was 95, still wearing a Celtic skirt or something. But he wrote Fantopia, and it's two societies that wanted to build each built a bridge, and one created the money. They took away the bottleneck to build it, and it's a wonderful little book. It's called Fantopia, and it's a wonderful introduction to monetary reform from a playful thinking point of view.
Thanks, Stephen.
And since you live in Chicago, I should try to get you a copy.
Stephen, I looked that up a couple times on your recommendation. Those copies of Fantopia are available online for $185. If you're giving them away, you be careful.
I'm gonna go get it.
Okay.
You can leave it on your porch and I'll pick it up.
Thank you, Carly, for that good question. I appreciate it. And Stephen came in with a quick reply. Now, John is on the stack, and then Paul is on the stack, and I don't know if we can follow up on this conversation or if it's going somewhere else. We only have a few minutes left. Let's make the most of it, my friends. John, then Paul.
I appreciated the comments and the questions that Bruce raised. And the public banking, I certainly think it it's useful. It provides the community the profits from banking, so that's fine. But it doesn't solve the problem of debt-free money. With regard to the big government issue, I think this is a really important issue because a lot of people are concerned about that. We know corruption occurs in governments. It occurs in big governments. It occurs in little governments. It occurs in corporations. And so this is a legitimate concern. And the writers of the NEED Act knew that. And therefore, what they put into the NEED Act was that at least 25% of new money has to go to the states. Because at least what the states do is they spend their money not on military stuff. What they do is they spend money on infrastructure, social and physical, education, roads, and so on. So by guaranteeing that money goes to the states, that sort of guarantees that amount of money can't be subject to corruption at the federal level. Or we could use the term favoritism at the federal level as another word for corruption. So the writers of the NEED Act had that in mind. And the other thing that they did, and this is something that conservatives tend to favor and has some merit, is the idea of direct funding to people. And if you have it on a per capita basis, it just goes to the people. And so the NEED Act also mentions that as a potential vehicle for getting money spent. So it recognized both the need for that kind of spending that essentially gets away from the possibility of corruption at the federal level, but it also recognizes that certain things need to be done in terms of infrastructure at the federal level. So both of those are essentially incorporated into the NEED Act, and that was part of the wisdom of the way the NEED Act was written. I would like to very briefly comment on Franz's concern, and I agree that this thing has to function at a global level. But my own approach to this is we have to do this through laws, and laws are governed at our own national level, and particularly the nation states control or should control their own money. And that's what essentially the NEED Act tries to do, is to reestablish government control, public control over the creation of money so it can be directed in appropriate ways rather than what the present system does. So thank you. Oh, wait a minute. Wait a minute. Carly, the bottleneck. You're right. That's the universal issue. That's what links us to everything, all these other concerns. And John Glazer, I think when he was talking to the board, mentioned this really wonderful thing, and that is that what he argued is that monetary reform brings together two powerful strands: the strand of social justice and the strand of money, two different languages, and it brings them together. And what he said was monetary reform is a language we can have without resorting to partisanship. And the AFJM, he said, brings pragmatism to social justice movements because it has a way of opening that bottleneck. Thanks for the question, Carly.
Pragmatism to social justice movements. Yeah,
Thank you for the answer.
Yeah.
very nice. We are running out of time. We have a new person on our call, Terrell Jackson. Welcome, but we're going to say goodbye soon. Paul, are you going to wrap it up for us?
Well, maybe not. I hate to talk after.
Another can of worms.
I hate to speak after John, and he's so eloquent, you know.
And Mark Pash will be next to wrap it up. Go ahead.
Just a couple of things. This is about public banking. I think we need to think about it. And I think Mark is right and wrong when he says that public purpose things can't be monetized. They can be monetized if somebody is out there to buy their product. And guess who that somebody is? It's got to be government. Government has to provide the money to buy the product that this person who borrows from the public bank is going to sell to in order to repay the loan. So some public banking will be hobbled unless there's monetary reform to really support it. So And the final comment is, if you don't like government control of our money, consider the alternatives. Hint, hint, 2008. You know, that's what happens. And
Yeah, good point.
I don't know what other alternatives there
Yeah, no,
are.
that's why I'm,
Yeah.
yeah.
Very good. Mark Pash, did you raise your hand? And then we'll let Hobart wrap it up. Mark Pash? Gotta get off mute.
You're muted.
All right, there we go. You got to work these computers here. Just I want to make a general statement, just so everybody knows. With all the $1 trillion of debt, $20 trillion of debt of always rolling over, the actual government bond market is freezing up. They have so much debt, they're having a difficulty trading it and buying it. Just so you let you know, it's just an interesting point. The public bank is also good for educating our leaders in money, which is happening right now, which is an advantage to the public bank. And we can monetize it. I don't call it monetize. I call it distributing newly money through debt if the debt is cheaper and longer. So the terms of the loan is a factor. Certain things that do not have a cash flow cannot be, and they have to be just sent out there by the government of the state government. And John was right on that. Third thing is I'm writing a position paper, the draft of a position paper. I hope everybody likes it. It'll be coming out in a few weeks to the board. And we really can solve climate change. The only problem with climate change, Franz, is that we don't have enough money to pay for the conversion. You'll see the solutions in the position paper. Hopefully the board will take a more centralist look at the things that I do in terms. So those are just my 3 closing comments. It was the interesting discussion. But you know, if corruption's in the court, we can't get rid of corruption, if you want to call it, or self-interest, or whatever you want to call it. It's everywhere. I prefer to keep the monetary creation system in a democratic government rather than in the corporate banks, where you have corruption also. It's just different forms. And that's just about it.
Thank you.
Okay.
Something else about corruption, when the wealth scale evens out a little more someday, when it's no longer everybody poor paying, except for this teeny tiny number of people collecting everything, then there won't be people with big enough fortunes to corrupt our governments as much. Like, over time, the corruption factor can get smaller instead of forever bigger and bigger.
Good point.
Robert wants to say something about our next coffee house, and then we all get to thank each other. I really appreciated this conversation. Go ahead, Robert.
Thank you, Mary. Thank you for hosting this event. You did a wonderful job. I think we got a good flow and a lot of interesting viewpoints. And as usual, I'll create a study stack of this event based on all kinds of ideas that were put in, and books, and et cetera, et cetera. So if you're on the newsletter list, you will get that in your box in a couple of days. This recording will be also available, but let's say wait for a while before that link will be live. We do have another coffee house coming that will be January 25th on Monday. Same hour, so for me that's 7 p.m. Central Time. And we will have the wonderful position paper team again doing a presentation. And they're pretty, yes, Carly and Paul and Mark, they're pretty ambitious. They will present something about social justice, about taxation, and something about a more simple introduction to monetary reform. And that all, kind of in an entertaining, simple format. So I invite everybody to come to that coffee house. If you're not in the newsletter, go to our website and just sign up. I would say to Frans Verhagen, my co-patriot from the Netherlands. When your book is out, we'll have a coffee house on your ideas. I think we need something of an article maybe also, and some processing of your ideas, which are very interesting, but not simple. So let's put that idea there in the future. And otherwise, Mary, I'll let it to you to give the official sign off here. And I thank everybody that came. I hope that everybody got something to say. We had the idea that anybody that is a male and old and a beard and white would not talk, but again, didn't happen. Mary, go ahead.
Well, I would still like very much to hear from one of the people. Oh, a couple people have already signed off. This has been very informative and stimulating for me, and I'm grateful to each of you, especially the ones who spoke. And good night.
Good night.
See you next month.
Wonderful.
I know some of you are going to the Our Money thing tomorrow. I hope there'll be a little report back.